What if health wasn't something you treated, but something you designed into your home? Today's guest has built a vision where being happier tomorrow than you are today and longevity lives in every room. Dr. Gautam Gulati, Dr. G, next on DocStars.
Welcome to DocPod's DocStars.
Hello, everyone. I'm JJ, and welcome to DocStars on the DocPod channel. Today's guest is Dr. Gautam Gulati, Dr. G, a visionary health artist, entrepreneur, and founder of the Wellme, where he designs luxury spaces that promote health and longevity. With over 25 years of experience spanning medicine, design, and storytelling, he's challenging the status quo. And again, he's inspired global brands. He's also created an award-winning docuseries called Superhumans. Dr. G is a sought-after speaker and innovation strategist, and today we'll explore his unconventional journey, which I'm very excited about. We had a great call the other day, and also why he calls himself an asset manager of health, and how our spaces and stories can actually transform the way we live. So Dr. Gautam Gulati, welcome to DocStars.
JJ, thank you so much. It's such a delight to be here. And I think that's one of the best intros I've ever heard. So thank you. Thank you for that.
It's all true. Believe me. I mean, I know I don't want to go too long on those, but I think
I'm kind of like, who's that guy that he's describing? Oh, me?
People need to understand what it is that you do. And this way, I kind of get that out of the way and we can just dive into the really great stuff, which are a lot of the issues. So let's get started. When I started doing a lot of research on you, I found that you have this kind of triple, even quadruple threat on the side of being on the education academic side, right? In terms of being a doctor, having an MD, having an MDH in public health, right? An MBA in business and interior design. I think you even obviously dabble in the real estate. So what better person to put all of that together, in my opinion, for the thesis that you have with the Wellme? And I want to read something to you that I found online, and I want us to kind of talk about this. Okay. And it says, the Wellme, interior wellness design for people living with chronic disease. And obviously, we're going to go a lot deeper than that today, but let's start there and talk about what that means.
Yeah, we've actually expanded beyond that line now. So yes, people living with a chronic disease, but also those looking to optimize their health from a longevity perspective as well. And I think, like all things, most of the great ideas oftentimes surface from accidental or personal experiences, and that was certainly the case over here for the Wellme, right? So I've spent my career really at the forefront of innovation, trying to understand where the future of healthcare is going, regardless of the environment that is in. Over the course of the next 3, 5, 10 years, and over the course of my career in building companies and running medical divisions and building out innovation practices, I noticed through a personal experience, and we can dive into that, but one of the most overlooked spaces was actually the space that we spent most of our time, and that's inside of our homes and most of our money. And really, because of some of the personal experiences that I've encountered with my dad with Alzheimer's and then me going through some of my own health struggles, I quickly came to realize that majority of the market is really not focused on how to look at our home environment as a way to promote health and prevent disease. And so we started going down that rabbit hole, and this is now surfacing up a number of years, right? Like nothing happens really overnight. So it's really just a bunch of conversations, a bunch of research, a bunch of observations that have happened over the course of the past maybe 10, 15 years that have all really culminated into what we're doing today. And really, I think it's really this convergence when you look back and connect the dots, looking at my experience as a medical doctor, as an internist, as well as being an entrepreneur and having sort of run real estate as a family operation for pretty much all my life. And then also being a certified interior designer and experienced designer really put me in a unique position to look at the convergence of those three. And I think the timing matters most right now, right? We started to see a lot of us spend even more time inside of our homes post the pandemic or during the pandemic. We're focusing a lot on wellness and self-care. And we're starting to understand how the environment can actually impact our health. So really, it's not like some magical thing that has propped up. I think it's just looking back, connecting the dots and understanding where the future is going that allowed us to create this convergence, which is now culminated into the Wellme. And we can unpack that however you want, but that's a little of the backstory.
Yeah, and I love it. And again, when we did our call, it was great because we shared personal stories, which I love because I think it puts it all kind of in context. And so to kind of frame this a little bit and what you're talking about the environment, I shared with you that I live in an area in Miami called Midtown. And my wife and I, we tend to focus on our lives to make sure we reduce friction. And when I told that to a lot of my friends, they thought I was crazy. They're like, what are you talking about? Get a great job, move to the suburbs, have the 2 kids, everything will be great. I said, yeah, but I don't know. I feel like I want to try to design it better, and I can do that too. And so we moved to an area where we don't need cars. We can walk to the grocery stores. We can walk to our primary care provider, where walking and movement is a big part of our day. And, some of my friends, they would tell me, well, I live in the suburbs. I have a car. I don't want to walk. This is so much easier to drive. And I don't, dispute that. It's probably easier to drive. But I actually think by doing what we're doing, we're forcing ourselves to walk every day. And I literally go to the grocery store every day. So I only pick up maybe a bag of groceries, but it's forcing me to do that. And
Yeah.
all of this for me is about habits, the environment, moving. Maybe talk a little bit about that because I hear some of your stories when I hear your talks and stuff. And I tell all my friends, Dr. G, that just move, check out your environment. What are you doing? And I guess the real kind of thesis behind it for me is pay attention to what you're doing. Try to be intentional. So maybe talk a little bit to that because I think you speak a lot on that.
Yeah, I like the fact that you brought up that word friction and sort of, I want to, I
Mm,
like to take complex things because healthcare can be really overwhelming. So I like to take complex things and really narrow it down to its most simplistic form. And so when I think of longevity, I actually created a longevity formula that I oftentimes like to use. And that formula is identity plus parentheses focus times habits over time. And I'll unpack that a little bit because it's related
okay.
to the point that you brought up in terms of how to design life and talking about friction. So identity is something you have to first identify um, the type of individual that you want to aspire to be, right? Are you the type of individual who, when given a choice between moving or sitting on the couch, you choose moving? Or if you're going to like move after eating, or are you the type of individual to go for the second dessert? Are you the type of individual who likes to plan things? And so, for me, going back to your introduction in terms of talking about asset manager and why I consider myself an asset manager, the most important asset that we have is our health. If I were to ask every single person, right, what do you consider your most important asset? We're all going to say mostly our health, right? So we have plans for like a business plan or a financial plan or relationship plans or educational plans, but very few people actually have a health plan, right, which is surrounded or designed to optimize their most important asset, their health, right? And so what's really important to figure out is who is it the type of individual that you want to become or you aspire to be in this health world? And we can get into that. I talk about, identifying what your number is, which is, what age do you aspire to live until in a healthy state, and what are you doing? And then let's work and create a plan to get you there and reverse engineer the plan to help you get there. So that's identity, right? The second portion, which is really a combination and a clump of what you focus on and your habits. So really identifying then as you sort of reverse engineer your plan and say, well, what are the things that I want to be doing at my optimal age at maybe 95 or 100? And then say, okay, to get there, am I sitting on a hammock reading a book, 5 books a day, or am I hiking my favorite trail in Jackson Hole, Wyoming? Right? Because based on what I want to do as my identity, I can then identify the things that I need to focus on to help me get there. Right? If I want to sit and read 5 books a day, I'm going to have to exercise my mental capacity and keep my cognitive abilities very sharp versus my physical ability to be able to hike a trail in Jacksonville, right? So very different approaches. Then when we talk about habits, right, which I know you had brought up as well. So focus times habits, you take the things that you want to focus on and you create habits around those. And I like to look at habits in terms of friction, as you brought up, right? Decrease the friction between you and the positive behavior that you want to achieve and increase the friction between you and the negative behavior. And there's multiple ways of doing that. A prime example of that is one of the things that I hate doing is running. And in order to get me to run, I only listen to podcasts when I'm running, and I'm obsessed with podcasts. And so that association, that reward-based system, reducing the friction between me and running is by offering up, the opportunity to listen to podcasts during the time. And I take it another level. I only go half podcast to half podcast. so that I'm incented to come back the next day. And then the last portion, which is sort of an obvious one, is time. Anything over time will create a sustained habit and not just some sort of short-term fix. Warren Buffett talks about compound interest being the eighth wonder of the world. And I tend to agree with that. I think in the context of health, compound interest, small decisions, small actions over the course of time will have significant results. So sorry, that's sort of a long answer to your question. But I really, once you said the word friction, that really sparked something in my head in terms of how I approach it.
No, but it's perfect. And actually, it's interesting you correlate that health with finance. And we're going to talk about that later in the show as well, because I do think there are a lot of parallels there, right? And, when I look at Warren Buffett and I think about the compounding idea, it takes time. There's another thing it takes that we all kind of forget, and that is discipline. And I think health is also one of those things. So, if I'm listening to us right now, I'm going, okay, so this is interesting. I want to focus on my health. We all know it's the most important thing. And I'm drilling down a little bit more even on what you just said. Health is the most important thing. Why do you think it eludes so many of us? Why do you think so many people they know it's the most important thing, yet they put it on the back burner, right? Why do you think that's happening? Or what does your experience tell us?
I try not to put blame on individuals, right? I think we're biologically wired to crave the things that oftentimes aren't healthy for us, right? It's
Mm,
something that I like to revert back to and talk about in the context of the infamous marshmallow test. So this is
hmm
for those who may not have heard the marshmallow test. It was a study done at Stanford University, I believe in the late 70s, and it was really a test designed to measure what is the characteristics for future leadership success if they tracked them multiple decades down the road. And I believe the study is actually still ongoing. And so the premise
mm.
of the test is what they did is they put a bunch of 4 and 5 year olds in a room, and a group of adults basically said, listen, uh, you know, have a seat here. We have to step out for a second, but here's a marshmallow. In the meantime, and we don't know how long we're going to be, but if you can wait until we come back and you don't eat your marshmallow, we will give you two when we return. And so these young children don't know if it's going to be, 5 minutes, 5 hours. They just don't know what that duration is going to be. And really, it was a measure of self-discipline as a determinant of future leadership success. And what they determined was those who were able to wait to receive the second marshmallow actually had a greater chance of success down the road. Now, that's a separate study, but if we bring this into the context of healthcare, right? Most of us are really bad at passing the marshmallow test, right? We fail it on a day-to-day basis. I mean, if you just think about it, we go out to dinner and we have the dessert and we justify it in our head saying, well, I'll do a double workout tomorrow, right? But that double
Exactly.
workout never comes, right? It's never there. Or we'll work extra hard during the week and we'll say, I'll catch up on my sleep over the weekend, which of course we know is not, so you can't catch up on sleep deprivation. So these are examples of us failing the marshmallow test on a daily basis, and so we're biologically wired to want to do sometimes the unhealthy thing. And so we have to very proactively be disciplined. And I like that fact that you brought up that word discipline. Um, we have to be proactive in terms of how can we look at designing health into our lives, and better yet, are there ways that we can do it that require the least amount of work on our end? Can we passively design it, perhaps utilizing the environment and the spaces that we live in, to help optimize for better health decision and make health your default choice and the easiest choice on a daily basis?
Yeah, that's the best part of that, because again, habits, and I always tell this to my nephews, they're 23 and 25, and exactly what you're saying. So much of life is habits, right? We form them. They can be good, they can be bad. And so making sure you try to form these good habits is so important. So let's talk about home as your health partner, as the default is health within your home. So how do you help people actually practically shift their mindset from seeing a home as just a place I live, it's a shelter, this is where I sleep, to actually treating it as a living partner in our health?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because if you look at sort of how people usually envision their homes, they look at it as a set of features, right? A set of
Yeah.
products, appliances, features, furniture, paint, like all these types of things that you drop in your
hmm
home. So here's a sauna, or I can put in a gym, or usually it's tucked in the basement, some sort of space for that. But again, I think we try to take a step back and look at your home holistically. If you think about it, you sleep in your home, you move in your home, you eat in your home, you think in your home, you socialize in your home, you breathe in your home. So these are all factors that essentially are impacting and influencing your health and your health behaviors on a daily basis, right? We spend over 76% of our time inside of these boxes. So it makes sense that our home can either hurt us or harm us, or it can help us, depending on how we design that. And so rather than sort of thinking about it as a feature set of different types of things, we like to build and design and think about homes across what we call the 7 levers of bioharmony. And those 7 levers of bioharmony, and this is not going to be of surprise, are sleep, movement, nutrition, connection, mindfulness, purpose, and safety. And so those are basically the 7 underlying elements that if you break those down and optimize for those, you will prevent disease or reverse disease and improve your health and optimize it. So whether you're looking at the conventional medical system and trying to relieve symptoms or treat diseases, or looking at it from a functional, holistic standpoint, those are the 7 elements that if you reset and fix those first, right, then you can essentially solve for anything that's more downstream that occurs later on in life. And so that's where we focus on. And so we break those down, and there's a whole set of design features that you can incorporate inside of your home for each of those 7 categories. So that's kind of how I like to think about it.
Interesting. So let's use my example. And we talked about this the other day because I think it's pertinent. It's kind of interesting to what you're talking about. Let's use my example. Let's take a simple example of myself and my wife. We live in a 1-bedroom apartment because, maybe people listening to this are thinking, I don't have a big home, right? I don't have 3,000 square feet. I live in a small 1-bedroom apartment. So I'd love to kind of drill down that a little deeper and say, okay, how can I kind of take what you're saying and incorporate it into my simple 1-bedroom, 1.5 bath. Now, I know we talked a little bit about, I have a fitness center in my building. There's a cold plunge, lucky enough to have that here. There's a sauna. There's a couple of things that are really nice to have. But even within my own 1-bedroom, what are some of those things I can do literally if people are listening right now to say, hey, I want a couple of quick tips. What can I do within my own home, even though it's small, to actually kind of adhere to what your thesis is?
Yeah, and I think that's oftentimes a misnomer that people want to believe that you need this sort of big home to do all these feature sets. And you actually don't, right?
Yep.
It doesn't matter what size of the home it is. All of those 7 elements that I talked about are applicable to any sized home. It could be a studio sized home. It could be a single room. It could be a large scale, mansion and everything in between. And it can be multifamily. It could be a single family home. It doesn't matter. It applies to any home. So what does matter is the context and the way we think about your home specifically. So again, what we try to do is go through an exercise to identify what your health plan is, what your medical plan is, what your health conditions you might be living with, things that might run in your family. How do we essentially recommend and do things that support your health on an ongoing basis versus just throwing a bunch of stuff inside of your home that may or may not apply to your health specifically? So that's exercise number 1. And oftentimes, if you're working with a provider, we will oftentimes work with them directly as well to get a better sense of the things that we can recommend specifically and design into your home. But let's just break some of these things down, right? So very simplistic stuff. We can look at the whole space holistically. So, oftentimes the things that most people overlook the most are the invisible components of their health, of the home. So looking at air quality, right? We can do, in a building, you might not be able to do the centralized air filtration because that's managed by the central operations of the building. But in your unit alone, as a 1-bedroom, for example, there are great air filters that you can actually put in place inside the most used rooms, or perhaps if it's depending on the size of it, you might be able to get air filters that can manage the whole space. Now that's extremely important because oftentimes we've become so good at building that the energy efficiency of our builds that oftentimes that we like to promote as a great thing oftentimes has negative impacts on our health because we're trapping all of these off-gassing and chemicals inside of the airs and inside of our spaces that are coming off of our floor stains, coming off of our paint, coming off of our furniture, coming off of the chemicals and cleaners that we use, coming off our clothes, and they're getting trapped inside of these boxes that we're spending all of our time. So the easiest thing and the most simplest thing, get your air clean. Not very expensive to do. Drop one of those things inside of the unit to do that. The other thing is water, right? You don't even want me to go down the path of explaining what's in our water because it is absolutely gross. It is gross, right? Our standards and thresholds in terms of what's allowed in our public water system is simply it's embarrassing. And so the simplest thing that you can do, especially if you can't do if you can't do the whole building and you just want to do your unit, install a reverse osmosis filter underneath your sink water or wherever you obtain most of your drinking water, whether it be the fridge or underneath your sink, and utilize that as your primary source of drinking water. And then you can start getting into some of the things around, the invisible toxins around your property. But those are the simplest of things. I think even optimizing, they're really simple things that you can do to optimize for sleep. I'm not going to be able to
Yes.
convince people to take a TV outside of their room or get their device out of the room, which would be the optimal solution
Yep.
to remove blue light exposure prior to sleeping. But you can get simple blue light glasses for $20 off of Amazon. You can use yellow ones or amber ones, closer to bedtime to mimic the light wavelengths that our natural circadian rhythm would be aligned to. So, that has multiple health benefits in reducing heart rate, getting us closer and sooner to deeper sleep, which then has trickle effects in terms of removing some of the toxin buildups that happen inside of our brain. And you want deep sleep to essentially remove those to get restorative sleep. So, and that has multiple implications from a metabolic standpoint, from neurodegeneration and on our cognition standpoint to prevent Alzheimer's and these other diseases of the brain. So multiple trigger effects. I mean, we can go down the line, and I can actually go down each of those categories of movement and nutrition. But those are just some great examples and simple examples that people can deploy now.
Yeah, and we'll put some of these links in the show notes. So again, people listening, if you're watching, you can tune in, check out the show notes as well, and you can dig down a little bit deeper within your website and some of the stuff you've done. And you already outlined several, which I think are really easy. Like you
And
said,
we have a bunch of design guides that people can access if they want to, each of those categories, regardless of what size or what location you're living in. And
Okay.
people don't even realize it. For example, like we talked about 2 or 3 measures of optimizing sleep. We actually have 32 different things that we recommend from a
Wow.
design standpoint, just inside of your bedroom and inside of your home that you can optimize and do today. So oftentimes it's, we don't know what we don't know. We've done the homework and the research, and we've identified what have the greatest scientific impact to your health. So it's amazing. It's amazing how our environment can small changes can actually have long-term impact.
Where can they find that, by the way, what you just mentioned, some of those little points? Where can they find that at?
Yeah, so that they'll have to engage with me directly, and we can send them a resource. Once we have a consultation, oftentimes we can then determine which are optimized for them. But yeah, that's just
Perfect.
reach out to us, and we can share those guides.
Fantastic. And again, what you said, I think there are all these little things, right? And I think sleep is one that we underestimate. We've heard a lot, I think, the last 4 or 5 years, and it's good. It's for good reason, right? I think it's one of, and you can talk to this more, but I think it's one of the simplest little hacks, if you will, or habits that you can start to implement into your lifestyle that really can change how you're living. And, when I say that to my friends, well, for me, a lot of it is going to bed at a similar time every night, right? It's not that I have to go to bed at 8 o'clock in the evening or at, 1 in the morning. It's just, I just don't want to have a huge variation there. So I try to go to bed at a similar time within 1 hour every night at the same time. I make sure there's no TV. You mentioned that. My wife and I, we don't have any TV in our room. So when we go in there, that blackout curtain comes down. I set the temperature to optimal temperature for sleeping. Pretty cool, right?
Yeah,
That's kind of interesting. These are
69 degrees is the optimal. Yeah,
exactly. I set it to 68
Fahrenheit.
degrees. These are really easy things
Yeah,
without me having to go out and buy an 8 sleep bed, which is maybe outside of our budget or something. There's
yeah.
just a lot of these little things that I think you're speaking to, which we can do. And so, like you always say, I want to break it down so it's easy for people to understand. And so I think that's great. You're doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny you brought up the consistent sleep time. Actually, if you had to choose between a consistent sleep time or wake up time, it's better to have a consistent wake up time.
Okay.
I like to
Good
say
to
that
know.
sleep begins the moment you wake up. And what you want to do is when you have a consistent, it's easier to control for your wake up time versus your sleep time, because sometimes you're out socializing and you don't want to interfere with that as well. But regardless of whether you go to bed at midnight or you go to bed at 9 p.m., you want to keep a consistent wake up time. And then the first thing that you want to do when you wake up is actually look out the window and look at some natural light. It doesn't have to be sunlight, just any kind of natural light, because that's the only way your brain and the chemicals and the hormones in your brain realize that you're basically adjusting to your circadian rhythm. So it realizes that it's daytime. And then it releases a set of chemicals that increases your energy, it increases your cortisol levels and other sets of hormones that basically say, all right, let's get active, let's get moving, let's start our day. Because if you don't do that, then your brain doesn't have a way to realize that. We've trapped ourselves inside of these manufactured boxes that are tricking our brain. And this is why we have inconsistent sleep times and wake up times. I mean, I can't remember the last time I've used an alarm clock. Like my body has naturally gets me up every single day.
Wow.
Doesn't matter whether I go to bed at 2 a.m. or 10 p.m. I get up at 5 a.m. every single day, usually within about 15 minutes before or after. And that's just been going on for months and months at a time, and I've never used a clock.
Is that because you set that at a priority at some point? I'm going to get up at 5, and over a period of time, however long it takes, that habit is formed, and then naturally you just wake up at 5?
Yeah, so it took some initial maneuvering, right? I had to get up
Yeah.
consistently at that time. And then again, like I said, getting some natural. Now, it's not really light at that time. So as soon as daylight hits, I look out the window. So usually that's around 6, depending on daylight saving and so forth. But usually, 6 or
Mhm.
so, the light starts to peak out. And I'll just sit there with my cup of coffee and I'll just make it a point to, either do some what I call exercise snacks. So use that 5 or 10 minutes of looking at natural light productively, either using it as kind of a meditative state. So I can meditate during that 5 to 10 minutes. I can do some exercise snacks, um, which are just getting my body in motion in small movements, and getting it active, or, just taking that time to schedule out my day. I mean, so, just looking out the window, looking at natural light, enjoying my cup of coffee. And that I do that consistently every day.
Yeah. And would it matter, thinking about what you just said? Let's say I wake up in the morning and it's a cloudy day. Is that still okay?
Yeah.
Just either being outside, looking outside, just getting some form of natural light is what you're saying, yeah?
Yes. Yeah. It doesn't matter whether
Okay.
it's a dark morning, a cloudy morning, a rainy morning, a sunny morning. Natural light is natural light. Your body knows it. We've only constructed these boxes, in recent history when it comes to the sort of the larger.
Mhm.
You look at the history of mankind, right? So our bodies are naturally adjusted based on the rhythm of the sun, and its movements in the sky, right? So just by getting some natural exposure to the air and light elements outside of your home makes the biggest difference. And
Yeah,
you
and
can
that's
even
a great.
adjust, even like little hacks. And I know we're going deep into the aspect of things, but I hope people get a sense like there's so much we can go into that are very
Yep.
simple things. Like even as you get closer to nighttime, we build these homes with a lot of overhead lights and recessed lights. Try to minimize that or put those on dimmer switches and minimize the overhead lighting as you get closer to nighttime, and try to use floor lamps with softer yellow lights as much as you can. Simply adjusting that starts to slow your body down, starts to slow your heart rate down. And again, why do this? Because you get to deep sleep sooner at nighttime, which is the important restorative sleep to reduce the toxins that build up over the course of the day. And that's important to prevent neurodegenerative diseases, but also it has linkages to your gut because we know there's a brain gut axis. So it impacts your metabolic profile as well.
Yeah, lighting is huge. And it's interesting you mentioned that because when we moved into our new apartment here in Miami, I literally told my wife, because she's from Brazil, and she's like, honey, what are you talking about? Cool lights, warm lights? What is all this you're saying? I said, listen, just trust me on this one. The cool lights are the ones we have like in our utility room or garage, maybe the bathroom, right? But then in our kitchen and actually in our living room and in our bedroom, we have the warm lights. And then I have the warm lights like after, say, 6 o'clock, I actually start to dim them and turn them down. So every night, maybe an hour before bed, we actually have it fairly dark if we are catching any TV before, or maybe they're dimmed. And so that speaks to what you're saying and how important it is. Now, what if someone is in a situation, and I'm only saying this because on a couple other podcasts I've done here on DocPod, I heard people mention, red light therapy or having other lights. If I'm in a situation where it's dark in the morning, I go to work when it's dark, I look outside, it's dark, I work a lot of hours, I'm working 80 hours a week. Are there other solutions? Again, this will be the last point I say on this because, like you say, we can go down a rabbit hole. But is red light therapy something people should be interested in? Or should they really just focus on looking outside, getting outside? What are your thoughts?
Well, red light therapy has different benefits from a health perspective, irrespective
Okay.
of the light. Even though it has light in the word of red light therapy, the red light therapy is actually not for circadian rhythm elements of things.
Okay.
Red light therapy has other cardiovascular, immune system, anti-inflammatory benefits, usually oftentimes working from the inside out. So there are other
Oh.
health benefits when it comes to red light therapy, but it's not necessarily associated specifically with our circadian rhythm, which I think what you're referencing is more related to the wavelengths of light that change throughout the day. So the harsher, whiter, bluer lights in the morning are basically signals to our brain to release our activity chemicals of the body, like a cortisol, which cortisol oftentimes people associate with stress, but cortisol is actually a hormone to get your body in fight or flight mode. So it's getting your body ready for the day. And then as the day goes along, it becomes redder, right? It becomes a little bit more of an amberish color and
Mm.
hue as you get towards nighttime. And that's basically designed to tell the chemicals and signals inside of your body to now let's shift and reduce our cortisol levels inside of our body, increase our melatonin levels to get us really prepared for rest and restorative sleep as the nighttime comes.
Makes sense. One of the podcasts that you did, actually, I think it was a stage performance, maybe the TED Talk, TEDx Talk, a couple things you've done. You referenced a line, which I pulled from that because I thought it was really poignant. And you said, health is a story over time, not a point in time. And I think that relates a lot to what you're doing. Maybe speak to that a little bit and what that means to you.
Thank you for picking that out. It's
Yeah.
actually really fascinating and interesting. So I first came to that realization and conclusion when I was in the innovation world, and I came across this incredible little chart that's really eye opening. It's a calendar by Tim Urban, and he calls it the 90-year calendar, life calendar in weeks. And in this calendar, there's a box, and every box is essentially a week of your life. And so I actually have it in my office. You can't see it here, but I have it framed. And it's basically a reminder of like, what are you doing with your life? Like, let's get to work. There's very limited time left. And you can kind of see where you are in terms of your life expectancy, right? And 90 is a goal for many people, right? Our life expectancy is actually 78.5 in terms of the average. But I looked at this graph in a very different way. I looked at this calendar in a very different way. And what I said, where in our life do we interact with our healthcare system? And so what I did is I colored those little boxes red for where I believed we interacted with our healthcare system, right? And where we paid attention to our health, essentially, which is oftentimes either we're going for a well checkup or we're trying to manage a symptom that's creeped up, right? So early on, lots of engagement with the health system, right? Because you're young, you're a baby, you're getting your vaccines, you're doing annual well checkups while you're in school, usually nothing to be concerned about. Then there's a huge gap. And then by the time you sort of hit your 35 to 50-ish range, in that range, usually around 40, your body starts to change and things start to creep up and they're very unexplained. And all the things that we had done prior in our life are now catching up to us. And so we start to exhibit these symptoms that force us to go into the healthcare system. So you see this sort of stretch in midlife where we're engaging with it a lot. And then the occasional check-ins for follow-ups between then and your end of life, and then a lot at the end of life, right? So you're basically pretty much in the healthcare system continuously. And so what was astonishing to me is that most of our innovation and our interactions are only at that point in time. It's when we enter the healthcare system. And it's where I had the realization that healthcare isn't something that happens at a point in time. It's happening to us every day, all the time, right? It's a story over time. And yet we have no way of understanding or looking at how our interactions are and decisions are on a daily basis on those in-between moments, right? So, one of the phrases or things I like to say is your biography becomes your biology, right? The decisions, the actions, the thoughts, the behaviors that you do on a daily basis, your biography, your story,
Mm.
essentially informs your future biology. And that calendar really highlighted that point for me. And so I sort of talk about that health is a story over time, not a point in time, because the heart disease that happened at 65 started when you were 20, or the diabetes at 55 started when you were 30, or the cancer that you got at 80 may have been triggered when you were, 35, or the dementia that developed at 70 started when you were 20, when you had poor sleep hygiene, right? So all of these things, again, story over time, biography becomes our biology. But that was sort of the marker for me, is when I saw that calendar and I was like, oh man, like, we're looking at this thing completely wrong.
Yeah, that correlation is incredible. And it's almost like a reverse bell curve, right? As you say, after we're born, we're in touch with our health. We go for visits, all these things. Then it actually drops down for a lot of years, but then towards the end of our life, it actually picks back up again. And
Right.
so that would lead me to ask you this question. And I hear this a lot, and I think that's why it's pertinent to talk with you about, because I think people see this on YouTube, they see it on TikTok, and they hear health span versus lifespan.
Mm.
So if you could define each and tell me which is more important to you, and it could be both, but I'm curious about that.
Oh my God, the language and the words we use matter more than anything else. So I'm glad you brought this up because longevity is being tossed around, and a lot
Yes.
of it's all over the media, it's all over like you can't. There's not a single day that goes by that somebody doesn't hear that word. But most people don't know how to unpack it and what it means. Right? They just think that longevity, just because it's in the word itself, means about living longer. And the longer piece is important, but it's about living longer in a healthier state, right? So, if I were to give people the option, do you want to live, till the age of 90, but the last 15 years of your life, you're living with polypathology, multiple chronic conditions, arthritis, maybe, or, dementia, maybe a cancer has creeped up, maybe you've got heart disease. Like that's a horrible way to live, right? Or would you rather live until the age of 80 and you're healthy up until the age of 79 or 80 until the day you die? And most people would choose to die earlier, but in a healthier state versus dying later in an unhealthy state, right? And so, what's important if we break down longevity, most people talk about in the context of lifespan, which is the number of years that you live. That's just a mathematical equation. Day you're born till the day you die. What's your chronological age, right? Where do you fall on that spectrum? But health span, I'd argue, is probably the more important factor of longevity, and that's the number of those years that you live in a healthy state, right? So
Mm.
you know, if 80 is my lifespan, the day that I die, I want how many of those years are lived in the healthiest state? That's your health span. I like to add a third factor to it, which is well span. And most people don't talk about this, but it's a moot point if you extend your life, you're healthy, but you're not happy. And so
Mm.
well span is kind of an important component of that as well. And so by the way, we're horrible at this as a country. We spend the most on our healthcare. We have the most advancements in our technology and the services that we do in our education. Yet we're one of the worst when it comes to health span. So on average, if our average life expectancy in this country is 78.5, and we live on average 12.4 years of our those last years, in a poor health or an unhealthy state. That's
Wow.
really, we're one of the lowest when it comes, if you look at comparisons with other countries. Our health span is probably one of the worst in the world, despite spending the most and having some of the most advancements in care. So we've
Yeah,
got
and we
some
could
work
do
to
a
do.
whole nother show just on that, by the way.
Right. We've got some work to do. But I mean, the good news is we can fix that,
Yes, it is fixable
right? Shows like
100%.
this, trying to get the message out, things that I do in terms of my company, trying to do it. So multiple different ways to address it, but it's fixable as long as we're proactive about it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Now we understand a little bit more lifespan, health span. And another example, I had a friend whose father, retired at 60. He wasn't in great health. And literally, he lived from he was so excited he retired, but from 60, and he lived till he was 90. And people would tell me, oh, wow, that's amazing. He lived till he was 90. And I'm like, yes, that's great. But I saw him from 60 to 90, and he literally sat in a chair every day and didn't do anything. So I think
Yeah.
that speaks a little bit to the lifespan versus the health span, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, those kind of things are so important for people to understand. It's not just about how long you live, it's really that health that you have, in getting to that point. I want to live long, but I also want to live healthy. Of course, that's the ideal, but I think just driving this narrative is really important. Okay, so let's talk
I mean, this
about
whole
the
concept of polypathology is a human invented thing, right? So,
true.
we tend to think, we've been aging since the dawn of mankind, right? Since the human was created. And so we tend to think that we know a lot about aging, but in reality, we don't, right? So, we've doubled life expectancy, from 38 to 78 roughly in just the past century, right? In 100 years,
Yeah.
we've doubled life expectancy, but that's because of one singular thing, which is our better understanding of infection control and hygiene. And
Mm.
so, we have better infectious practice, hygiene practices, better sterilization techniques. It was the development of penicillin and our invention of antibiotics. And so we've been able to fend off things that would have killed us from an infection standpoint better than ever before. And so we've doubled life expectancy. But if we were to extrapolate people from, 1920 to now, they probably would have died of the same things that we're dying of now. If you remove the infection, but what they were dying of is probably in battle, right? They're dying by the gun or by the sword or something
That's right.
else that may have killed them. And so, if you think about that and even take it a step further, is that's only, 3 or 4 generations that we're talking about. And so our understanding of the science of aging is still at early stages when you think about it in the context of the larger picture here. So it's really fascinating to think about how there was a lot of buzz and talk around aging and what these diseases are doing, but our understanding of these things and how they develop over time is still relatively new. So it's a fascinating
Yeah.
field.
Yeah, it is. And one thing that I find interesting is that I'm glad you made that point that things have gotten way better. If you look at the 1920s and 30s, then you look at the 50s and you look at today, not only are we living longer, the lifespan, but I think the health span is also getting better. And so if you watch the news, you don't hear that at all. Right. And this is, I think, tricky for people because they listen to the news. They're like, oh, I think if I lived 50 years ago, it'd be way better. Or 70 years ago. I'm like,
Right.
no, no. Let's just show you the data and the evidence that today is the best time to ever be alive. And you know when the second best time will be? Probably tomorrow. Do you know what I mean? So when I think about what you're saying, that makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, we have the best tools available to us to actually extend our lifespan and health span. But at the same time, we understand science and our human bodies so well that we can actually manufacture sickness into our lives. And so we've been
True.
so good at basically being able to, create these addictive patterns that basically
Mm.
perpetuate unhealthy behaviors over time. And so that's what we're battling against. But I fundamentally believe that if we've manufactured and designed sickness into our lives, that we can equally design health into our lives.
Exactly. Or we can design our way out of it, like you say, even the
Right.
bad parts. And so a lot of that is what you said. I mean, it's finding that happy medium, right?
Yeah.
Finding the balance as always. So let's talk a little bit about the health and kind of the real estate side. What parallels do you see between investing in property and investing in personal health? Because I think those are two very interesting parts.
I think they're interrelated. You can't separate yourself
Okay.
from the built environment. We're in these spaces, right?
Mm,
It's kind of like how people want to separate the work-life balance. Like, no, you can't really do that. I mean, they are integrated. You have to figure out how they work with each other, right? It's not like a binary situation where there's work and then there's personal life. They're interconnected. And so you got to find that right balance that works well for you. And I think the same with our homes or any kind of built
mm,
structure. Like, we are integral to these things. We're not going to get rid of them, right? They're not going away anywhere. And so you sort of look at the evolution of these structures. They're not built to really support and look after our well-being. And so, I think it's about time that, the place that we spend most of our time and most of our money, we start looking at these structures, as vessels to help promote health and prevent disease.
yeah, which is perfect. And again, it's so
And I
hard to
think I
get
didn't answer
people.
your question there, so we can probably go back and you remind me of what the original question was. But
No worries, no worries. I mean, but I still think you make a great point, and just understanding that we have to prioritize things differently. There has to be a shift, right, in the way we think about where we live. And for me, that's just a big message here that we can't just put one step in front of the other and do what we've been doing in the past. We need to innovate. We need to understand how can we be healthier within our homes and really look at that from a macro level and then drill down, right, into the minutia and say, what can I tweak here? What can I tweak there? So of course, your point is still a really good one.
yeah, and I think we've got a long way to go, right? There's from the way
Hmm.
I view it, you take a macro view and look at the trees from the forest perspective. There's an evolution of these structures and homes over the course of time, right? So, they initially started off as a place of shelter, right? We needed to protect ourselves from the elements of earth and nature, when it was raining or snowing or extreme heat, and so we needed these things for
Hmm.
shelter. But then over the next, several decades, as our ability to mass produce things became much better in craftsmanship, these structures became a source of convenience and comfort. And that's
Yeah.
predominantly where we are now, right? Like, we love to put all of these conveniences and comforts inside of our homes. And I think that's great. And I think we're going to build on that. But the next iteration is going to be, in my perspective, is how can we use these structures to help be a partner in our health and well-being, since we're spending most of our time here. I mean, if you think back at one point, for example, a refrigerator inside of your home was not necessarily a standard thing, right?
Nope.
Yet or a bathroom inside of your home, right? We had outhouses, and now we put them inside of the homes.
That's right.
And as we innovate and as we evolve, these homes for certain objectives, they become part of our standard. But nobody would build a home now and be like, should we put the bathroom in the home or outside of the home? No, it's part of the home, right? So I think similarly, as we think about wellness orientation and features and amenities in the future, it will be kind of like a duh moment. Like, of course, we're going to have lighting optimized for your sleep inside your bed. Of course, we're going to have proper air filtration so that you're breathing, properly inside of your home and not taking in these chemicals. Of course, we're going to have areas for connection. Of course, we're going to have, areas for a home gym or move to optimize movement inside of your home, right? Of course, we're going to have all these features which seem like added, maybe luxuries today, but they're going to be
Mm.
the standard of the home tomorrow. At least that's the way I view the world. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's going to be a long play. But we're doing our part to work with individuals as well as builders to ensure that people at least are aware of the impact their home can have on their health, and that they can do something about it.
Yeah, no, I think you're on the right path 100% there. When I did my research as well, we talked a little bit about the beginning about maybe your motivation, behind designing wellness driven spaces. I know about your father and the situation there, and we know how bad chronic diseases can be for people. And I love that. Was that kind of the motivation initially behind all this? That's my first question. And then the second thing is, in one sentence or so, can you just kind of tell us, what problem are you ultimately solving? Those are two things that I find interesting: your motivation, your dad's story, and then obviously the big problem that you're ultimately solving. So people just had a takeaway, they'd remember this.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the latter portion. What's the big thing that we're solving in a single statement? I'm trying to make health your default way of living. Right? So can we use your environment to make health your default way of living on a daily basis without you even knowing it? And so we start with the structures of
Mm.
our home to be able to do that, since that's where you spend most of your time. It's funny, looking back in terms of the influences, how this came about. And thank you for bringing up my father. You know, yes, this seems like a really cool, creative area to be in the field of health and real estate. But again, I think a lot of this was basically stemmed out of personal frustration. And being a medical doctor, when my dad developed Alzheimer's, we're a family of doctors, including himself. And so we got him the best medical treatment, the best pills, the best doctors, the best health system, best care you could get. And then when they eventually moved in with me, my parents moved in with me, it was the first time that I realized the impact that how he lived and navigated inside of our homes made more of a difference than any pill or medication or doctor he could have been exposed to, right? So that was my first realization. And of course, seeing that, on a day-to-day basis, it struck my curiosity. And so I went to Dr. Google. And so I looked up Google, like what to do inside of the homes of somebody living with dementia or Alzheimer's, and there were no answers. And so I started having to dig up some of the, going into some of the literature and the research and material science, and looking at, the impact of paint colors or lighting or, textures or bed materials or temperatures, and how that impacts symptoms of agitation that occur with sundowning for somebody with dementia. So you can start to imagine, you can actually unpack a lot of the symptoms that happen in this particular case, dementia or Alzheimer's, in just the environment that they're in. And that really opened my eyes to a whole host of things that we then addressed. For example, is he at flight risk? And are there digital health tools that we can put on him
Hmm.
that inform us or notify us if he leaves the home, or if he's at fall risk? Or are there utensils we can use when he develops tremors? Or are there walking patterns that we can establish throughout the home that he, as his memory diminishes over time, he can memorize throughout? Are there ways that we can create more, cognitive exercises by creating board games around and offering up connection? So all of these things we ended up having to develop, design protocols ourselves. And then I noticed a lot of my friends who happened to be caretaking for their parents as well were started asking me questions like, "What did you do? Like, how do I do this? It seemed to work in your
Yep.
home." And that's just how it works, right? It's sort of, then you start to realize, oh wait, how is no one really addressing this? And sort of being the entrepreneur and innovator, it was my first sort of realization that somebody needs to do it. I was hoping for somebody else to do it, but nobody was doing it. And then I applied the same concepts to my own health. So I went through my own struggles, because right around that time, my health was falling apart. I had little kids at that time. I was taking care of my
Mm.
parents. And so my own health was neglected. And so I was pre-diabetic. I was practically, from a BMI perspective, clinically obese. I was hypertensive. I started developing these unexplained gut symptoms. It took a decade for them to ultimately say, well, we can't figure it out, so we'll just call it, Crohn's disease, which I've now proven wrong. But there I had, some minor hearing loss. I had a host of other things. I had a big knee injury that really was a culmination of a variety of things, not anything singular. But our traditional health system wanted to pin it to one diagnosis, one disease across these things, different diseases. And so I ended up taking matters into my own hands and applying the same principles as I did with my dad and saying, how can I holistically look at my home as a way to change my daily behaviors, create better eating habits, create better movement habits, create better sleeping habits, foster connection and socialization. So I took all of those 7 levers, which how they came to be as a result of doing it on myself and making those changes over the course of 2 years. And I've now reversed almost 100% all of those symptoms that I've just described simply by altering my environment. And so I also do this by tracking. I'm a biohacker, right? So I've got digital
Mm.
devices, the rings, and tracking my gait movement and my microbiome and doing full body scans. But I also looked at my biological age. And prior to me making those changes, I was actually aging at a rate of 1.4. So that
Oh,
was 1.5 times the rate that I should be aging at, meaning I probably would have seen my end of life somewhere around 68 to 70. And I've
wow.
now been able to reverse that rate of aging, or not reverse it, but slow it down to a rate of 0.9. And if I keep on this track, and simply, keeping up with, the things that I've implemented in terms of my daily habits and behaviors and lifestyles, I am on track to essentially live healthy until the age of 100 now. So I'm
Wow.
aging at a rate of zero point 0.9, and my goal is to get that down to a zero point 0.7. So it's simple mathematics, right? And I'm still
Yep.
enjoying my life. It's not like I'm doing things that are not enjoyable and I'm down this, this regimented path of living this, unhappy life because I have to stick to these health goals. No, I've just designed my environment that makes this the default way of living for me.
Yeah. And I think a great way to also reframe this is for so many years, Dr. G, people, I think when I would tell them the way that I live, they're like, oh, but you're sacrificing in life. I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, my life is amazing. My wife and I, we have this incredible life. I don't feel like I'm sacrificing by
Right.
all these little changes that we've made so we have a better health span, right?
Right.
Exactly as you said. And also kind of talking about the little biohacks, what gets measured gets managed. A little shout out to Tim Ferriss. And that's so important, though, because you need to track these things. It's so hard to do if you're not tracking them. And I know sometimes we see so much about the Oura rings and all these different things you can track. And we tend to, I see some of my friends like, oh, it's just too much. I was like, listen, just find 1 or 2 things then. But just because we hear a lot about it doesn't mean it can't help you. So do your research, understand how it can help you. And a personal story, thinking about your dad, my mom 3 years ago was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And as you know,
Sorry.
that's a very tough
Yeah.
one. Yeah, thank you. And she did survive 3 years though, which was amazing. And for 2 years, my wife and I kind of readjusted our lives and we moved back to Chicago to help my mom during this final period. My stepdad, my sister as well was there, my nephews. And at one point, we literally had 7 of us, in their condo in downtown Chicago, all living there. And we did exactly what you're talking about. We didn't spend a lot of money, but we had to figure out how can we make sure she's taking the pills properly, that she's not going to trip and fall. Can I put an Apple Watch on her wrist to make sure when she's walking around, if we go out to the store, I can track her? All these little things, we made sure that at nighttime, we readjusted the dinner table so we'd all have dinner together for that social connection. And so, again, it didn't cost a lot, but it was about
Right.
putting our minds into it and saying we can do this if we just are a little creative with the environment to make it better for her, right?
Yeah. And we're so focused on in our medical system, like that end of life, it's almost like the difference between lifespan and health span again, right? We're focused on
Yep.
keeping them alive. But what's
Hmm.
just as important, yes, it is important to keep them alive as long as you can, but you want them to have a good quality of life, which is essentially equating it to what's their health span for that portion of their life until their end of life, right? And so that's what you really want to optimize because what's the point of keeping them alive for another 2 to 3 years when they're in pain and misery and disconnected and not
Yep.
with it. So it's really, the changes that we can make around the home it may get them, living longer, but more importantly, at least they're living their last days or whatever conditions that they're living with in a better, happier state. And that is what's important.
Yes,
And I
comfortably,
wanted
right? And
right,
yeah.
comfortably and happily. And I just wanted to make a point about your notion about measuring data and
Yeah.
tracking, because I do believe tracking is important, but we don't want to track to the point of obsession. And I think
Okay.
people get really hung up on that when they get these devices, for example, they're so obsessed with what their sleep score is. And I feel like that defeats the purpose. And so what you want
Good
to be
point.
doing is tracking the data to understand how to make better decisions in your life on a day-to-day basis and trend directly, but you don't want to be obsessed about it, because you don't want to be that individual who you're enjoying a night evening out with your friends. It
Yep.
happens to be a late dinner. And you're like, well, I got to leave now. I got to go home because it's going to impact my sleep score and I have to maintain the sleep score. You don't want to be that individual, right? Like a
No.
social connection is a part of it. I think it adds stress to your life when you get obsessed about it. So it really defeats the purpose of doing it. So
Yeah.
again, tracking, but not to the point of obsession, just to the point of helping you to make better informed decisions on a day-to-day basis.
It's a great point. Don't be that person. I almost was several times at dinner before my wife was like, honey, let it go. Don't say it. Because she knew what I was about to say, And you know what it is? It's like a dopamine hit, right? Like
Yeah.
if I look every day and I'm like, oh, I got my 94 sleep score. And so again, I'm going to make a parallel to finance because I do this and I'm a culprit of it and I shouldn't. I've tried to get better about it. I can't look at my portfolio or my stock every day. I'll check it maybe once every 3 months, buy with conviction, hold it. It's the same kind of thing. It's a dopamine hit, but then it's such a stressor going up and down. And I think the same thing when I look at all of these numbers, you can look at it, but don't stare at it too long, as you said, because I think it can be a little too much, right?
I mean, it's playing on one of our natural biologic emotions, right? So there's only a handful of human emotions, and
Totally.
we're competitive by nature, right? Like you talked about the dopamine hit. I mean, if you look at like all these social media platforms, it's all about comparing ourselves with other people. They're doing this, and therefore I feel bad about myself
Yep.
because I'm not doing that. And it really takes you down this bad path. And so we need to. I mean, it's nice to be competitive if it levels yourself, but oftentimes tell my kids, the only person you should be competing with is yourself. You want to be 1% better tomorrow than you are today, right? Those
Yep.
minor improvements on a daily basis will compound over time, but don't do it because you're trying to compete with somebody else, right? So that's important.
And it's hard today because in an attention economy, I feel like envy is everywhere there now.
Yeah.
I see it with everybody. No matter what they have, they're not happy. And we all have friends we know who make a lot of money, they get everything right, but they're still not happy. And
Right.
one thing I've learned over the years is that I'm very happy where I'm at. I can live with less and be happy. And I don't know if it's a skill, a habit, but it's important to have. And again, I've mentioned to my nephews, I'm like, you have to find a point in your life where you're happy with what you have because you're going to constantly be bombarded by all of this noise out there of how amazing people's lives are. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but you have to find a way to find that signal, which is for you to be happy with where you're at.
100%. Totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about some of the evidence side because, again, with DocPod, what we want to do is we want to bring incredible doctors like you on, but we also want to provide some as an evidence. So when I look at like medical rationale, right? What medical evidence actually supports the idea that our environment directly impacts DNA repair and cellular health? I know I'm going a little bit deep there, but if you have some answers to that, it'd be very interesting.
Yeah, I think the best way to sort of talk about that is bringing it into the context of things that we're told to do on a regular basis from big influencers like
Okay.
Huberman and Atia and all these guys, right?
Hmm.
Let's just talk about specifically this notion of contrast therapy, because I know it's very popular right now, whether it be in the form of, high intensity interval training, HIIT therapy, right? Where we hear a lot of these gyms that are propping up everywhere,
Hmm.
or just in contrast therapy when we talk about it in the context of hot versus cold, right? So sauna and cold plunge, right? Really popular right now, having a big movement. The question becomes why, right? What's the
Mm.
science behind this? And yeah, you feel good and people are telling you to do it, but why are they telling you to do it? Like what's the biology, the human health biology that runs behind this to say this is actually good for longevity? So let's break this down, for example, for a little bit. So again, with the notion and the context that our understanding of aging is still a relatively new process, right? So as of right now, we believe there are 12 hallmarks of aging. In 10 years, maybe that's 20, or maybe it's
Mm.
5. We don't know. But the point is it's multifactorial. It's not a single, pathway towards how we age. Um, But what we do know, for example, is our ability to repair DNA, to your point, diminishes over time as we age. And so we need to be able to produce the right proteins that are responsible for DNA repair as we age, so we don't end up with certain diseases and expression of genetics in certain ways, based on our epigenome, which we can go down as a separate conversation as well. So, for example, when it comes to contrast therapy, the reason we recommend these things is because in that micro stressed environment, right, that acute stress of, short time in the heat, short time in the cold, it triggers the release of these proteins called sirtuins. And right now we understand that there's roughly 7 sirtuins, but around 3 of them are responsible for DNA repair. And so when you expose yourself to these micro adverse moments like HIT therapy or contrast hot and cold, you release these important proteins called sirtuins that then go on and produce the DNA repair proteins that we need to help combat aging as we tend to live. So that's the rationale behind it. That's the science behind it. But it's not a blanket statement, because you don't, it's not that you just have to be in, a sauna, for a long periods of time and cold. There's a certain regimen, right? So, too much of the stress, there's good stress and bad stress. So too much of it can actually, you know, move over to what would be considered chronic stress, and chronic stress on your body is actually bad. But when you present yourself with acute stress moments that you then train your body to be resilient towards, think about it. Stress is actually caused by a number of factors in your body. The foods that you eat can cause stress. The way that you think can cause stress. The way that you move can cause stress, right? All of these things are stressors on your body that we oftentimes don't think about. And so your ability to, when you're exposed to these micro stress moments, to be able to combat that and not release the chemicals that are responsible for aging and longevity down the road, we can actually better control the rate of aging and our process of aging. So that's the science behind a lot of this stuff. So when it comes to, for example, the optimal contrast for hot and cold, and there are a lot of studies that have been done here, right? People, an ice plunge, for example, makes for a good Instagram post, but you don't actually have to do an ice plunge, right? You can, the science actually shows that if you can get to the body temperature, the water temperature to 54 degrees or below, right, which is well above, freezing cold, 54 degrees or below, you get the benefits of a cold exposure. And when it comes to the heat side of things, you want something typically in the hotter side of things, so 180 degrees or above, right? So that then, if you're in an infrared sauna, do you get the full benefits as if you would be in a traditional Finnish sauna that we can get actually to hotter temperatures? So you want to try to be in a hotter temperature for roughly 20 minutes, and then in the cold temperature for roughly 4 minutes. I call it the 24 regimen, right? So up to 4 minutes, you get some good benefits in the cold environment. Again, 54 degrees or below. Anything between 4 and 6 minutes is basically neutral. You're not really getting plateaus. You're not really getting much health benefit. Anything beyond 6 minutes can actually be harmful to your health, right? So those that are sitting there hours in a cold plunge for 10 minutes, it's actually not something to gloat about, because you're actually doing more harm to your health in that context. So really understanding the science of why we do it is important to understand the implications when it comes to optimizing your health and optimizing for longevity. And sometimes, like, you don't even have to do, if you don't want to do a cold plunge, like we oftentimes recommend inside of homes, rather than a cold plunge, you can put a vitamin C shower with a cold infuser on your shower head. And so that actually gets the temperature down. Plus you get some of the other health benefits that comes from putting in a vitamin C filter head.
Interesting. Is the cold infuser, is that an add-on that can be added to any standard shower head, or is it
Yeah, it
something more
requires some
elaborate?
plumbing alterations and
Okay.
modifications, yes. But,
Okay.
you're gonna spend money on getting this big, large cold plunger. Like you said, like if you're in a one-bedroom apartment, you can't drop a cold plunge there if your unit doesn't have, or the building doesn't have it, or you're not gonna go down every time. But what gets you to do it is if you can, adjust your temperature, on your shower to be able to do that. And again,
Yeah.
something I like to say, something is better than nothing. Like some people may say, well, I already have an infrared sauna. Again, I'm just sharing what the science and evidence, because we went down this evidence path. Um, what we know from that perspective. But again, there's going to be more science developed around, utilizing infrared temperatures, and cold therapy and what that does to your health. So the science is developing, it's growing. And again, something is better than nothing. So if you have that, doing it in that environment is better than not doing it at all.
Yeah, but I also like that you're quantifying it, because I think some things that I see problems is exactly, you go and you look on TikTok or YouTube or Facebook or anywhere people are posting these cold plunges, they're in a sauna. It's about the right amount of time that you're
Right.
doing this, is what I'm hearing. It's about the right temperature. It's about the right amount of time. So again, consider the source. If you're watching and listening today, try to do your research, get the temperatures right, get the amount of time right. And also what I'm hearing is that it's good to do both, right? This isn't a zero sum game. You can do cold and heat, not at the same time, obviously, but they both have their advantages, correct?
Yeah, independently, they both have their own health advantages, right? So I don't want to say
Mm,
that you have to do contrast to get the health benefits. If you just do sauna and different types of sauna, like infrared works from the inside out, the traditional Finnish saunas work from the outside in. So different health benefits depending on which type you use, different health benefits when it comes to using the cold plunge or a cold shower independently. Together as contrast therapy, different health benefits. So the way you utilize it, utilizing it as different modalities also gives you some health benefits. So, um, I mean, there's so many different things that, in conjunction, you can do a protocol or regimen around it. You can use them independently, but they all have different health benefits depending on how you use it, right? So, you can sit there and go into a gym and say, I'm going to bench press, X amount. But of course, it's the regimen, the protocol, the movements, the over the course of time that actually have the greatest implications and health benefits from that. So, and
yeah,
that's
and the
we're there to
consistency.
help them guide that. So we don't just put these things inside of homes or inside of buildings or inside of hotels. We help try to get people to understand how to use these things properly to optimize and get the best health benefits out of them.
That's right. That's why you got to seek the right help, right, in getting this done properly. So
Yeah.
let's talk about longevity quadrants. I was reading about this. Can you break down those four kind of dimensions, right, of functional longevity, and explain how they interact? Because this is an interesting part for me.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I like to sort of take complex things and simplify them as much as possible. And it's a question I get asked a lot, like, how does longevity fit in the world of medicine? Where does it fit? And so I like to think about it in terms of four quadrants. And these four quadrants, and I'll break them on down, are lifestyle medicine, longevity medicine, functional medicine, and conventional medicine. So what are each of these four categories? And they're all important and they're all interrelated. So lifestyle medicine are basically comes down to what I described as those seven levers of bioharmony, right? So it's the things that you should be focusing on a day-to-day basis from a lifestyle perspective and a behavior standpoint. So those, again, as a reminder, are sleep, nutrition, movement, connection, mindfulness, purpose, and safety. That's the foundation and root of every disease or every health. Fix those, and you won't even have to go into the rest of the health system, right? Um, but it's hard. We're not perfect at it. That's why I call them levers, right?
Mm.
Because we can adjust them up and down. Some things we're good at, some things we're not good at. So they're levels. And some things, depending on where you are in life, if you're just having kids or you're later in life or you're younger, those are going to be adjusted differently, right? So our job is to figure out how to optimize that where we are in that period of time in our life. Let's move down to the next quadrant, which is if I'm on the right track, how do I optimize those? Okay. And health optimization is at the core of longevity practices, right? How do we essentially incorporate modalities and things that you need to do to optimize and extend and improve your health span over the course of time? That's the world of longevity medicine. Okay. Now let's go to sort of the bottom half of the quadrant, which is more related to sick care. Okay.
Mm.
So when you develop symptoms, there's two approaches to it. I don't know why those interesting little fireworks behind there on my side of the screen, but
Wow, look at that. That's
I
kind of
think I did
cool.
some sort of motion. I don't know that triggered that. So when you develop symptoms, which we're all inevitably going to, right? None of us are perfect, right? There are two things. You want a system to be able to fix and repair it, right? Give you the medication, get you the surgery that you need. That's the system that most of us are familiar with. That's what I trained for down in medical school. That's the fix and repair system. That's our conventional system. That's what insurance pays for.
Mm.
And that is essentially once you develop symptoms or diseases, we can then go in and treat it. But there's the other portion of it, which I think is equally important, is understanding the root cause of that, because that didn't happen overnight. So can we go down to the root cause and understand all of the factors that are essentially developed or resulted in you having heart disease or resulted in you having, diabetes or whatever, or arthritis? And then can we start working on those addressable root cause factors that could essentially, help to address and fix those symptoms? That's the world of functional integrative medicine. So those are the four quadrants. They all should be working together tangentially, but they don't. I know we're still in an environment where, functional medicine is competing with conventional medicine, it's competing with longevity medicine, and it's competing with lifestyle medicine. So, what we need to be doing is thinking about all of these quadrants holistically and how we get them to work together. I think we'll eventually get there. I'm an optimist, but I think most of it just comes down to incentive structures.
Do you think in the US specifically, if you had to choose a couple of those, longevity, functional, conventional medicine, lifestyle, because I'm hearing you and I'm thinking, okay, a couple of those we're good at, but a couple of those we're really poor at. If you have to choose a couple of those and say, hey, this of the four, these are the areas we need to focus on the most in the US because we're just not doing a good job. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think, the conventional medicine piece is a little bit singled out because that's the piece that actually can make money, right? It just makes natural sense. I need to go, there's a problem, I go fix it, I have a way to pay for it. But that is the only piece of it that's in sort of, the core sick care system where, I can do a surgery, I can prescribe a pill, I can do this modality and charge for it, and I can have a third party pay for it. The other quadrants are all related to prevention. And prevention is A, harder to measure, and B, defeats the purpose that if you prevent somebody from having something in the first place, it's not really a good business model, right? If you can cure something or prevent something, then how do you make money off of that? And I think that becomes our core challenge. Like, what is, that right balance? Right now, a lot of people, believe, and it's a little bit of a misnomer because they believe that longevity is only something that the rich can do because it's a cash paying environment, right? You have to pay these big bucks to these longevity doctors to optimize my health and prevent me from getting these diseases. That is to some degree true, but also oftentimes what they don't realize is that most of the longevity recommendations that if you do correctly are lifestyle oriented, and all of those things are free, right? How to get good sleep,
Yep.
how to eat properly, how to move properly, all of those things are free. So it's a little bit of this misnomer that we tend to believe that to optimize health and achieve longevity, it's only something for the rich. It's something that any of us can do. It's simple stuff, not easy stuff, but simple stuff and things that we can essentially
Yeah.
design into our lives.
Yeah, it's definitely, I feel like in the US specifically, and other countries as well, we are definitely more of a reactive versus proactive
For
approach.
sure.
And you just pointed out a couple of reasons why that is. We get it, it makes sense. But I think if we could shift the narrative a little bit more towards adding more to the proactive side, which so much of what you're doing is, I think will be so much more beneficial, right?
I'm
So
glad you
when
brought that
someone,
up because if you look
yeah,
at that quadrant, the bottom half, which I tend to put as functional and conventional medicine, becomes to some degree reactive, and then the longevity and lifestyle medicine becomes proactive. They're
yeah.
equally important. You sort of need both, but you won't need the reactive portion. Hopefully, if you do the proactive portion correctly.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if I look at that top half and the bottom half and see where most of the money is dedicated towards that. There would be an
Right.
interesting pattern there.
Right.
So, something to think about. So, what about as we get closer to the end of the show, defining success? So, I'm watching the show, I'm listening to the show, and when someone invests in this kind of lifestyle that we've talked about today with you, what does success actually look like for them in your thoughts?
Better tomorrow than you are today. Again, I like to sort of take these complex things and break it down. At the end of the day, we are all in the story business, right? It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're a doctor, your job is to basically take the story of the patient today and make their story tomorrow better. And so our tools, when you look at the population and in terms of health, again, our job is essentially turn the story of the individual to whatever it is today to something that they aspire or want it to be tomorrow. And tomorrow being hypothetical, it could be 10 years from now, it could literally be tomorrow, it could be, 50 years from now. And so the tools that we have to be able to do that are different, right? A doctor tends to have pills, or a surgeon has a scalpel, or a functional medicine doctor might have your biomarkers in your labs. For me, I use the home as our tool, right? And so there's different ways to essentially address um, this notion of Sorry, I lost my train of thought there a little bit. But did I answer your question there, or what was the?
Yeah. No, you did. It was
Yep.
perfect. It's exactly what I'm talking about. And it's interesting you're talking about that because I think, your thesis is simple, right? To be better tomorrow than we are today. And I think if you really distill it down, all these other things support that, right? But
Yeah.
that's really what we're trying to do, be better tomorrow than we are today. And it makes me think about, when you hear
Oh,
people
right,
talk about
and that's
increment.
success.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is the for
exactly.
exactly. So that's what it was, success. That if you've achieved that, then you've essentially achieved some element of success. And the more and more you
That
can
is your
do that, the
definition. Yeah.
greater you get. Yeah.
You've actually hit success there, exactly. And then if you can do that on a consistent basis, right, you can form those habits and do it over a long period of sustained time. That is the definition of success. But I also always think about this in terms of optimization of life, in terms of finance. Inertia is a real thing. But if we can be better tomorrow than we are today, it's incremental, right? I think too many people, we want to have that success like tomorrow. But the reality is it's going to take time, but a little bit each day really adds up and goes back to that whole compounding thing with Warren Buffett, right? Sometimes you can't see it, these little wins every single minute of every day. But if you just try to kind of get a little bit better each day, that incremental growth, it really adds up over time.
Yeah. We're a culture, again,
Yeah.
back to our basic human emotions. We want the quick fix. We all do.
Oh,
I mean,
100%.
myself included, right? We all fall into this trap. Like, what's going to do? Like, I don't want to have to put in the work.
Yeah.
But that, people don't want to hear it. It's funny, if you have two individuals who have essentially optimized their health, and you're at a cocktail party, and an individual, they come up to one person, they come up to me, for example, and like, so how did you do it? What did you do? I was like, you know what? I slept, I got 8 hours of sleep. I ate healthy whole foods. I moved on a daily basis. So like, that's cool. And the other guy in the corner is talking about, I cold plunge and I take these
Yep.
peptides and I hook myself to an IV drip with this cocktail every single week. Like, that just sounds more interesting, right? And so
Yep.
it's human behavior. We gravitate towards those things because it sounds cooler. It makes us feel good. We
Totally.
think it's going to be a quick fix, but in reality, that's not how you solve it. There's a role and a place for them, but that's not the end all solution.
Yeah, and the interesting part is I guarantee you at that cocktail party, there's a lot more people over there with that other guy
Right.
listening to his
Right.
cool ideas versus, but that goes back to just the steady way, right? It's boring for people. If I just tell them get 8 hours sleep, like you said, wake up at a certain time every morning if you can, do all the things we've discussed, that's not exciting for people. And I feel like it's harder when it's not as exciting. All right, so let's talk about something else I found as we near the end here, which I think is very
You've done your
interesting.
research and homework here. I like this. You're digging us with
I
good topics.
have. I have, Dr. G. I mean, you've done a lot of great. I'll tell you, you're killing me because you've been so successful and done so many things. It makes my deep dive a lot harder, by the way, but well done. All right. So, 7 levels of bioharmony. Okay. So, I'm going to list these 7. All right. So, which of these 7 are there? Sleep, movement, nutrition, purpose, mindfulness, safety, connection. And I'm mentioning them, and people can deep dive them on their own. But if someone's listening, they say, okay, these are the 7 levels of bioharmony. Which one should I start with? Because I think a lot of life is prioritizing, right? Which one is most critical? And some of these we've touched on, but it'd be interesting for you to kind of give your opinion on these.
I run polls all the time out of curiosity when I give a talk and I talk about the 7 levers of bioharmony. And I oftentimes ask people, which of these factors do you think is the most important when it comes to health optimization? Again, not fixing disease, but health optimization, right? The health span. And I
Yep.
get all sorts of, it's all over the place. Like, oh, it's the air quality, so therefore the safety. Oh, it's the, how I sleep. Oh, it's how I eat. And by far, what the evidence in the data shows, the 2 biggest factors that we can associate for health optimization in terms of the predictors of longevity is connection and purpose. Connection and purpose. Those 2 by far are the biggest predictors of your health span and longevity. A second, I don't want to say close or distant second, but a second to that is not a singular item. It's actually a trifecta. It's a trifecta of 3 things, which is sleep, how you move, and what you eat. So sleep, movement, and nutrition. And people tend to often think of those in silos, but our body doesn't work in silos. It's not like we sleep, we eat, we move. They're all related, right? How we move, impacts how we eat, impacts how we sleep, and it's all interconnected. And so if you're really great at exercise, but you get poor sleep and you eat poorly, it's kind of a moot point. right? Because our metabolism, the way our body functions, is all interrelated, even at the cellular level. So it's really important that it's better to be okay at all three of those things than to be amazing at one thing and horrible at the other two. So really looking at sleep, movement, and nutrition as a trifecta of things and how to improve that as a collective is important. And then safety, I feel, is kind of like sort of the underlying factor of a lot of this stuff, right? So safety is looking at your air, your water, the invisible components, any of the risks or hazards around our environment, and of course, mindfulness is the mental health of the stressors in life. Of course, that's an important factor. But if you can get your connection and purpose, oftentimes fixed, and the other trifecta right, oftentimes your mindfulness tends to fall into place. So that's
That's
kind of how
really
the 7
interesting.
layers map up together.
It's really interesting about connection and purpose, because I don't think if I gave that question to 10 people before they gave me their responses, I think that they would say it's probably sleep, what I put in my mouth in terms of nutrition, in movement, just get out there, move. That's such a big
Yeah.
one. But I don't think they would mention connection or purpose. And it's something that you and I talked about on the phone before we're going to get started with this conversation today is that, my wife and I really prioritize health is number one, because without our health, we can't do anything. The second thing is social connections in the form of relationships, whether it be family, friends, colleagues, whatever that looks like, right? And then you also have this incredible thing about purpose. I have had so many friends, Dr. G, who said, I just can't wait to retire when I'm, 55 or 60 or 65. I'm just going to do nothing. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting, but you really need to have a plan because you might live till you're 75, 80 years old, as you said, 85, 30 years is a long time. If you retire at 55 years old, you need to have purpose. Now, that doesn't mean you have to get paid for that purpose. It could be just something
Right.
that you love doing, but have connections with people, have a purpose. And that speaks to what you're talking about, right?
And sometimes you're absolutely right. And I think people get really scared. I think it's important to talk about this because people get scared of big words like purpose, right? We throw
Yes.
words like passion and purpose, pursue what you're passionate about and have purpose in life. It doesn't have to be these large, grandiose things, right? It could be as simple as, showing up at your church every Sunday and supporting the local community. It can be as simple as just making meals for your grandchildren, right? Some sort of small micro moments of meaning on a daily basis ladders up to a sense of purpose in your life. That's usually all you need. And the way to do that is very simple from my perspective, is ensure that you maintain and design a sense of curiosity throughout your life. Because it's within your curiosity, you're going to find the things that excite you the most. And then you double down on that, and that becomes a sense of meaning and purpose throughout your life. So really, again, breaking it down to the basics, don't think of like this, I've got to change the world and I got to be like, this person over here. Just look at yourself and say, what am I most curious about? What within that sense of curiosity do I feel like brings meaning to my life? Double down on that, and that's your purpose. And it doesn't have to be this big thing.
Yeah, and stay curious. It's actually the fourth thing that my wife and I believe in, which is stay curious. I just find when I'm curious about life, I'm excited about life, and that has to sustain me for the rest of my life. So when I'm done being curious about this thing, stay curious about something else and be open to it because I've seen people who are curious. And I think I mentioned this to you. I worked on cruise ships for 20 years. And so I had a chance to literally, it was like a perfect, like practical application case study for 20 years, Dr. G, where every night I'm surrounded by people between the ages of 65 and 95 years old. And all they're doing is cruising their final, for maybe 8 months a year. And every night at dinner time, I host dinners. I'm at the bar with them. And they're telling me, literally giving me this incredible advice saying, do this, don't do this. This is the regret I have. Inevitably, almost all of them said, the older you get, JJ, if I can share my best piece of advice, make sure you have purpose towards the end of your life. Make sure you stay curious, right?
Yeah.
Make sure you have social connections. The happiest ones said that. The ones
Yes.
who had the biggest regrets didn't do any of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, getting on a more philosophical level here, because I love that you brought that up. I mean, we strip away a sense of curiosity and creativity as we age, right? I mean, this is,
Yep.
again, this is designed and manufactured into our lives. So we wanted people thinking the same, acting the same, doing the same. That's what we reward in our work environment. That's what we reward, in all sorts of different environments that we function as a society on. And so I just ask people to, question why we do the things that we do, right? So like it boggles my mind the fact that we go through high school and then we stop, or then we go through high school and we go through college and we stop, and we go through, like, why does that have to stop? Why is that like a finite thing? Like life, like learning to me is a lifelong thing. And curiosity is enveloped in this aspect of learning. If you're curious, you're going to learn, right? And so why does it have to be something that we just stop and then we don't no longer do? Or why is it that we at some point don't focus on our friends and now focus on our job and then come back to our friends later on, which has now resulted in this sort of loneliness epidemic? So just take a step back, reimagine and rethink the assumptions that we've been told to believe that we need to function as a society off of, and then redesign it in a way that serves your benefit versus, trying to put a square peg in a round hole, right? Don't try to force fit it. Do what works for you that's going to be optimized for your health,
Yeah, and these things
your
can live
well-being.
together. I think
Yeah.
we always want to say, like, oh, I have to do my job now, or okay, now I'm having to do it with my friends. But exactly as you said, they need to live in parallel, right? You can focus on your job, but still give yourself time for your family and spend time with connections and social connections, and still time a little bit for yourself, just to give yourself a little bit of time throughout the day just for you and your own thoughts. All these things can live together. I think the bigger issue for probably me and you and a lot of people is really time management, right? Is managing that properly. And that's not an easy thing to do, but it's probably the right thing to do, right?
Right. Well, you have time for the things that you prioritize. So that really just tells you what you're
Exactly.
prioritizing in your life. Is it an important asset? If it truly is, you're going to find time to prioritize it. If you don't believe it is, you're not going to, right? So, this notion of time, we all have the same amount of time on a day-to-day basis, right? It's how we
Yep.
utilize that time. And so that really just comes down to like what really is important to you.
Yeah,
And
100%.
again,
Dr.
going
G.
back to going back to that whole element of we're horrible at the marshmallow test, like we will take short-term gain over long-term implications every day. And so, we'll
Yeah.
sacrifice the future to get what we want today. And that's not really a good approach.
And
And
by the way, I really recommend anybody, if you can, watch the video of the marshmallow. The
so,
kids' faces are hilarious.
yes. Yeah.
I mean, literally, you see them squinting like, I want to eat it. I don't want to eat it. And
Yes.
because when you mentioned that marshmallow, I had seen the video, and honestly, it's priceless.
You can see their internal struggle. They're like, oh,
Yes,
and some even put their arm out, like, should I go for it? Should I not?
that's right.
Their eyes are moving, like, oh my God. Like it's a real
That's right.
struggle. So
It
it's
is.
hard. And this is why I don't like to put blame on people. We're
Yeah.
wired this way, right? So it's important for us to just, I think awareness is half the battle. The fact that you're aware, and there's oftentimes I can say if there's one phrase that gets stuck in your head, like Dr. G, you can't get out of your head. You have Dr. G saying this is your biography becomes your biology. Going back to that statement, every thought, every food, every movement, every single action that you do on a day-to-day basis informs what your future health would be. So now that you know that, just be aware and you'll start to notice that naturally you're gravitating towards making smarter, healthier decisions versus the bad ones, simply just by just being aware of it.
Yeah, I love it. Your biography becomes your biology. Really interesting. Dr. Gulati, thank you for sharing your journey today, your vision. It's been pretty cool, man. Really excited just to talk with you, from founding the Well Home and redefining how we live in our spaces and our environment, right? To elevating story as medicine, because you are a storyteller. You prove that health is more than just biology, even. It is that environment. It's that purpose. It's the connection we literally just touched on. So true success isn't just living longer, but living better, as we said, with health span, not just lifespan. It's designing our lives, right? Our homes and communities where wellness is the default. So thank you for challenging our thoughts on that and showing us through a new lens what it looks like. Thank you.
That's a great recap. Who needs AI when we've got JJ?
No, but I mean, it's incredible. Literally, what you're doing is really, really interesting. So before we go, I would like to leave our audience with what we call the clear signal. And this is something that kind of encapsulates or kind of, it's a great takeaway for everyone. Health is not just something we have, it's something by design that we can create. And that's what Dr. G is doing, and this is, again, what this conversation is about. By treating our homes, our stories, and our choices actually as health assets, which is so important, we move beyond symptom fixing and toward a life of longevity, resilience, and freedom. So when we design for our health, we design for what I call hope or possibility. So again, a special thank you to Dr. Gautam Gulati, Dr. G, founder of the Well Home. Please like and subscribe so we can continue bringing you conversations with top doctors and healthcare leaders like Dr. G from around the world. That is the goal here at DocPod. And as always, follow us on, of course, hashtag and at DocPod Health. And as always, the DocPod channel, because health, it's everything.
Celebrating the world's best. This is DocPod's Doc Stars.